it's all about people. It's people doing business with people. You have to build those relationships. You have to build that kind of trust. And you are in this, let's say, in this game, and the best way to make it happen is to always strive for finding the win-win. So if you can find the win-win where the customer is happy and he gets a win, and you are happy because you obviously won, you got a new customer, that's the best way to achieve
Wonderful.
success.
Welcome to 20-Minute Leaders. Just sit back, relax, and learn from the leaders of today. It's a journey. Each one is different, unique, inspiring. Let's get started. This episode is powered by J Ventures, a community-driven VC fund in Silicon Valley, in partnership with Lomitech, and sponsored by Homeward Ventures, Hippo Insurance, Upwest, Hillel at Stanford, Leap, and Birthright Excel. This episode is all about databases, microseconds fulfillment. Welcome Ami Aharonovich, General Manager of Aerospike Israel. He is a technology geek with over 20 years of experience in the world of databases, and is eager to continuously learn and improve while removing obstacles out of his way. He is keen to reach success and always strive to achieve a true win-win, and believes that doing business is all about the people and finding the shared road to success. For 8 years, he's worked for John Bryce and delivered technical database training for thousands of people globally. Following that, he founded his training and services boutique company, and after 10 years, he had the opportunity to kickstart the Aerospike Israel entity, which has been leading since 2018. Ami Aharonovich, welcome to 20-Minute Leaders. How are you today?
I'm perfectly fine. Good morning. Thank you for having me. I'm great. Yourself?
I'm fantastic. Thank you very much for joining me today. We're going to be talking about databases, a little bit of music, a little bit about your own journey, and what you've learned over your incredible experiences, whether it be an education through John Bryce or now at Aerospike. And I'd love for you to start by walking me through your career a little bit, and start me off with your entrance to the whole database world. And I think what I really want to try to understand is, how do you get to become so passionate about this topic?
Wow. Um, I think I can say that the fact that I'm today a database geek, you can say, is probably kind of like a coincidence. Maybe it was, I don't know, fate. So when I started my journey, my professional journey, you'd say, on being a high tech geek, it was about mid 2000. I'm a little old, so like 21 years ago. I basically just did a John Bryce training that was focused on building websites. We're talking about the year 2000. Everyone needs a website, and I did this what was used to be called the webmaster training, and I was basically learning, basic programming and creating websites like HTML and stuff, back in the year 2000. In the end of that course, of that training, which was like a 3 months educational training, I got a couple of proposals, to be a webmaster for this website and that website and another. And then there was one specific proposal that was more interesting to me than others, which was to become a John Bryce trainer, instructor, to actually stay working for John Bryce as a technical instructor. And then I had to do my like audition, the screen test. So I had to deliver something like a 15, 20 minutes of training, and I did a basic HTML training, like really basic stuff that every kid can probably do it today. And I don't know, maybe I was lucky, but one of the guys that was actually sitting in that room and watching me doing that audition, he was leading the database team at John Bryce at that point of time. And by the end of that 20 minutes audition, he said, I like you. I like the way you train. I like the way you deliver, the content and everything, how you explain everything. I want you to come and work for my team. And I said, okay, well, what does it mean? What am I going to do there? He said, it's the database team. You're going to learn Oracle and SQL and all this kind of stuff. You know nothing about it. Leave it to us. We'll learn. We'll teach you. You will learn. Everything will be fine. And like 3 months later, or maybe 4 months later at most, I was delivering my first Oracle database programming
Wow.
training in Champaign, Illinois. So it was literally, it was like crazy start. and the rest is history. So that's how I started my journey with databases. During the 8 years that I was working there, from 2000 to 2008, I did, I don't know, hundreds, maybe thousands of trainings globally, all over the world, in obviously in Israel, of course, but also in the States and in Europe and in many, many countries, in many, many companies. And I got to meet lots of people, and many of the database administrators back at those years that learned Oracle or other database related courses, we probably met at some point of time. So that's where it all started.
Amazing. And so tell me a little bit about what you learned about teaching databases, in those 8 years, because I guess one of the things that, and I don't know if it was Socrates or somebody said the best way to become an expert in something is to teach it to somebody else, right? And so what was it like for you those 8 years? You're teaching this material. How is your relationship changing with the material as you're teaching it?
So it's very hard actually to start, because it always feels like you have to learn a lot, and then you have to be better than anyone else that you're going to teach, because you have to be ready for each and every question and example, and it's a big challenge. But I think that's one of the things that that is mostly exciting for me, the fact that I know that I have a challenge, and then how I strive to get to that challenge, to be in that place in my life where I can say, okay, I made it, and now next challenge. So it was a huge challenge for me, and I think that I learned a lot, and constantly learning and constantly getting better is part of my day to day. And a database is kind of like, I'm trying to to explain it to people that are less familiar with the high tech and technologies and everything. It's kind of like if you think about like something like a car and you need to drive somewhere, that's basically like the engine.
Mm.
Not many people want to know how exactly the engine works, and how exactly to fix it and to tune it if it makes you some troubles and stuff. Many people just like to go into the car and drive it. Maybe you prefer to learn about the UI, how things look like, and more be at the front. And databases is all about the engine. It's all about the infrastructure, and it fascinated me because the thing that you can do with the databases, and how it can impact the entire application. Today, fast forward 20 years later, with the world of digital and with the world of real time. 20 years ago, we used to talk about having hundreds of users using the database at once. 100 users, maybe 1,000 users. Wow, that's like a big application. You can have 1,000 users at the same time. If you look at the gaming applications today, just as an example, you'll find hundreds of thousands of people using that application at once. And if you think about things like PayPal and Sony and all those kind of monsters, you'll find millions of people that are using those kind of applications at once. The databases are completely in different places than they used to be like 20 years ago. You don't talk about database from tens or hundreds of users, you talk about millions of users, and databases have billions of records
Hmm.
today. Numbers that were not really that relevant 20, 21 years ago when I started this kind of journey. So it's really fascinating for me, and constantly learning and getting better, and learning more and more about the technology and the use cases, and what are the kind of things that you can enable, that you can empower using your database technology. Those are the stuff that are really fascinating, I believe.
And so one of the things that you also mentioned to me previously is this idea that of our expectation in terms of latency and the optimization of databases, and it's no longer just a place where that allows us to store information. Now it's actually it is a critical infrastructure, and the critical part of it is also the fact that we need sometimes data in microseconds, not in seconds or in minutes, right?
Definitely, definitely. Well, while we used to talk about like seconds, so I will get my query processed by the database like in a second. Wow, that's fast. Today we talk about microseconds. So, think about an autonomous vehicle that constantly gets data in real time. It doesn't have a second to make a decision. Do I
Right.
need to go here or do I need to go there? Okay, think about, we mentioned a few minutes ago, we mentioned something like PayPal, a digital experience. You have to move money from one place to another. You have to do it at real time. you don't have a second to decide if this is a fraud or if this is a real user that is actually trying to, transfer money from one place to another.
Right.
There are plenty of applications that we are using today, especially since everything moved to this piece. Uh, where every microsecond really makes a difference. Every microsecond matters. Okay, so if you think about those kind of applications, in a second, you might have to check hundreds of different parameters and make hundreds of decisions whether you should do this or you should do that. And thinking about we talked a little about cyber, for example, thinking about those cyber examples, you don't have a second to make a decision. You have microseconds where you will need to check plenty of different parameters and aspects and make the right decision about what is actually going on and what should I do with this cyber fraud game. Okay, just a gaming experience. You're simply just playing on your iPhone or Android or whatever. You can't really wait a few seconds to get your scores or to get to the next level or whatever. You just stop using that game and switch to another game, right? Or on a website if you want to purchase something, right?
Right.
So it's a different world today where we live in, and the databases has to keep up with that kind of demand for the users, for the throughput, for the latency, and also being uptime all the time. You can't really afford yourself to be down. I had a conversation with someone about, I don't know, like 2 weeks ago. The database that they were using actually caused them a fail or a downtime, and the entire application, this is like a digital application, something that has to be online, used for online trading. They were down for like 15 hours. Okay,
Wow.
that causes you millions of dollars of losses, right? So you have to be constantly up, like five nines, constantly uptime. You have to be global, obviously, because it doesn't matter if you are a mobile application that was developed in Ukraine, in Israel, or wherever. It's going to be used globally, hopefully. That's your goal. And you have to support those hundreds of thousands of millions of users playing at the same time or using that application at the same time. And also very, very low latencies, microseconds that matters. That's where we are today with databases.
Right. And so, a lot of the things that you're mentioning now, I think are a great segue to your current position in Aerospike. You're country manager for Israel. You've been there for quite a few years. Previously, you were also the CEO of Brelix and DB Access. And, within Aerospike, what are you learning about, working with enterprise customers, and how do you instill either a source of security in terms of the latency? Because obviously at the end, promises are great, but the world is moving more to this microseconds. It's a very crowded market, and it's a lot of responsibility to go to another company and say we're going to be helping you manage your databases, and you're going to have to trust us that we're going to be there for you, and you're not going to lose those millions of dollars. So how do you even strategically go about thinking through providing a service like that?
So I think one of the main challenges today in our market, and you got it really, really perfectly well, what exactly we have there in terms of, throughput, latency, all the stuff that we talked about. One of the main challenges is the scale. So, if we look back at Israel as an ecosystem, for startups, we used to be called, as you probably know, the startup nation, right? But if we look at what is going on in our country in like the last year or 2 years, it's not really a startup nation anymore. It's a scale-up nation with all those huge companies that we keep hearing only in the last 2 weeks. I think last week we had like 3 or 4 companies that went public like in 2 days, maybe even in the same day, with Tabula and
Yeah.
Payoneer and whatever, so many names. So it's not only that game of the real time and microseconds and everything we talked about and like the latency, it's also the scale. So many of those companies started 4 years ago, 7 years ago, 10 years ago with a smaller scale, but today they have to cope with huge scales of data and huge scales of users. And this is, one of the biggest challenges that, at least as I see it, you mentioned the fact that I'm the country manager for Aerospike. So when I was first introduced to Aerospike, I've been a database guy for many years, as we said, and I came from the relational databases And when I was first introduced to Aerospike, which was in 2016, so okay, it's a database that can do lots of throughput and very low latency and okay, great performance. But the big thing is the scale, because many databases can work really fast and really great for like 100 gigabyte of data. But what happens when it's 100 terabyte of data? Okay, and today in Israel, working with companies like AppsFlyer, working with companies like Iron Source, working with companies like Playtika and Cybereason, and all those extremely growing fast companies. Some of them are already public. Some of them will, for sure, become public very soon. The scale is the main thing. So it's not only you have to be fast and great and up, but you have to do it in a scale of like tens and hundreds of
Right.
terabytes. And that's really, it's a huge challenge. uh, I don't want to bore you with things like how exactly the database engine works, but let's just say that the fact that we can optimize the way we use the hardware gives us the ability to work at any scale from gigabytes to terabytes and to petabytes even, and basically solve any real-time application requirements where you need high throughput, low latency, much lower footprint server-wise. So it's also easier to manage it, and this is exactly the places where we shine, where you need that
Mhm.
throughput and latency, and you need it at scale. So those are, and that's fascinating. I believe that's what is encouraging me, every day to meet those guys where they have those. Sometimes it can be a company with 70 people or 100 people, like a tiny company from Israel, somewhere here in the center of Tel Aviv, a small startup, but their scale is like hundreds of terabytes of data every day. So that's really,
Amazing.
it's
And
fascinating.
so when you talk about the relationships with these companies, this trust, what have you learned about building this trust and conveying it? At the end, you're working with enterprises, the technology can be great. They're not coming in, they're not looking at your hardware. You're not bringing them into your code base, right? You have to form some sort of relationship so that they instill this trust in you. What did you learn about forming this trust with a lot of these clients that you mentioned?
Great question. So it's all about relationships. It's not about, doing business with brands, with companies, with logos. It's all about doing business with people. It's people doing business with people. And it doesn't matter if you're a small company, a large company, an Israeli company, a US company. One of the things that I also had to, start learning and adjust, as you mentioned, I used to work for John Bryce. I had my own business that I started and managed for like 10 years. It's different to be part of a US company, a corporate which is global with offices all around the world. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if it's US or Israeli or German or a huge company or a startup. It's all about people. It's people doing business with people. You have to build those relationships. You have to build that kind of trust. And you are in this, let's say, in this game, and the best way to make it happen is to always strive for finding the win-win. So if you can find the win-win where the customer is happy and he gets a win, and you are happy because you obviously won, you got a new customer, that's the best way to achieve
Wonderful.
success.
I love this conversation, and Anami, thank you so much for coming here. I have a few last short questions that I want to ask, not about databases or about Aerospike, but
Sure.
about you. And I want to take you back to your childhood. What fascinated you as a kid before you got introduced to even HTML or databases?
um, I think three main things. It's gonna sound a little, maybe four things. Three things from school, and the other one is outside of school. So school wise, learning wise, it's gonna sound very geeky, but I really liked mathematics, English, and later on when I started learning computers, and that was in high school. All the others, I was like if you look at my certification from like high school, you'll see everything is like very much poor. But those were like the three main topics that I really liked, and it worked better for me there, comparing to the other stuff that I learned and did. And the other thing is that many people actually don't know that, but I used to play the keyboards. So I played the piano and the organ since like I was 6 years old for like 12 years until the army. And I think also today when I look at what I did there in my 12 years there, and what I did later on as being an engineer, a database geek, a high tech geek. Uh, there are many things that I can see that I did there as a musician, because I was basically, you can say that I was on the path to becoming a professional musician. Some of the friends that I played with back then are great musicians today, and some of them are really famous and very popular. And the kind of creativity that you need in being a musician is sometimes the kind of creativity that you need even today when you are an engineer, or where you're developing programs and writing code. That's one type of creativity, and that's another type of creativity, but it's the same kind of creativity that you can still use it today. I'm still playing the keyboard. It's just a different type of keyboard, but
I love it. I love it. And so, what inspires you today as you go about your day to day in Aerospike?
Um, sometimes, I try to think about things like role models and stuff like that. But honestly, instead of just saying that, she is a role model or he is a role model, like I think that in general, um, as long as you constantly, have a challenge in life and you strive to do your best to learn, to improve, and to achieve that challenge, and the way to do it, the road to success is full of creating those relationships and partnerships, working with people. It's all about people, like I said before, and finding the best shared way to success. If anyone has that kind of mindset and the goal, and he or she is doing his best, her best to achieve that, that can be a perfect role. Whether you're a politician, someone like Yair Lapid, for example, he had a challenge, a huge challenge, and he put aside his ego and everything else that he has to do to achieve that challenge. And whether you're Gal Gadot, and she had her own challenge, and she wanted to be an actress and the best one, and being in those huge films like Wonder Woman, and she made it. So as long as you have that challenge in life and you constantly strive to achieve it, and you're looking for that best shared partnership way to achieve that win-win, that's a role model for me.
Amazing. And what are three words you would use to describe yourself?
Um, I'm a people,
I'm a
a people's
people's
person.
people's person. Ami, toda
תודה
raba. Thank you
רבה.
very,
Thank you
very
very
much.
much, Michael. Thanks a lot. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Take care.